Hello, this is Stacy from 2 Weeks in a Hammock. Welcome to this tour of Cottage Row on North Manitou Island in the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. I am here on a beautiful late summer's day in the village area near the dock, and we're going to take a walk through Cottage Row. Cottage Row was developed in the late 1800s as a resort area for a friends group from Chicago, led by Carrie Blossom, the daughter of Silas Boardman. Silas was a retired banker who came here in search of better health. Boardman also had a commercial farm and raised horses here. This first lot on the right we are passing is now vacant. It was the former site of the lodge and dining hall, moved here in the 1890s for food service to the Cottage Row summer residents. It eventually burned down in 1953 and the lot has been empty since. This first cottage we're coming up here to was the first one erected on site on Cottage Row, and this is the Boardman Cottage, also called the Monte Carlo. It was built in 1893 or 94, and it is a Frank Lloyd Wright suspected structure, and let me tell you why. You can look at the architectural elements here that do look Frank Lloyd Wright-esque. The wide front doorway is different than the other cottages. Also, you can see the windows on the right and left were part of an addition that was put on later. So if you can imagine this as a long, wide, low porch, it's got that kind of look to it. Further evidence for this is that Frank Lloyd Wright had built a home in Chicago for Carrie and her husband George that was designed by him, and it was suspected that he might have also designed this for them as well. It would have been very early in his career, and there's no direct evidence of it other than circumstantial. As we walk around the house here, so you can see that this addition used to be a porch and it was built on the side. We come around behind the building. We've got the back door, which is also wider than a lot of the doors on the other cottages that we're going to see today. Coming around the side here, there was a small addition that was torn off recently. The park went through recently and redid the foundations on some of these structures, and on this one they tore off that little back porch area. They also redid the porch for this. You can see it has new decking on the porch, and some of the foundation along there with the stones on the bottom was removed in order to rebuild the porch. We're going to walk up here to the door and see if we can peek inside. I'm getting some glare, doesn't really work real well, but inside is a fireplace. These cottages all had fireplaces in them to drive off the chill on a chilly northern Lake Michigan summer day. As we walk down the row here, you can see there's stones along the walkway. That was the base for what used to be a boardwalk. So this had a wooden boardwalk along here with gas lamps in the late 1800s, and you can kind of imagine women walking along here in beautiful flowing dresses with parasols and having the gas lights lit, just beautiful. Off to the right here, this is the actual first lot. This is lot number 10 of Cottage Row. It is vacant. It always has been. It was used as an alfalfa patch for deer back in the 30s and 40s. When deer were introduced to the island in the 1920s, they were brought in for a hunting resort that was eventually developed here by the Manitou Island Association and William Angel. But we're going back to Cottage Row days. So as we look here at the beginning of the development of this, so there were 10 lots that were developed, and these 10 lots were meant for 10 individual cottages with a shared 18-acre space down in front of the cottages along Lake Michigan. And these cottages, none of them had heat, or other than the fireplaces, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have insulation. They were definitely meant for summer use. This cottage we're coming along to now is the Shirley Foote Alford Cottage. It was originally built here in 1901, destroyed by fire in 1934, and a second cottage was built in 1935, and this is what we're looking at now. This particular cottage was a Sears cabin, or Sears kit home that was built here on site, and it is privately owned still, so we're not going to go poke around that property, but that little shed out in the back was a migrant worker cottage. The next cottage we're coming up here to is the Riggs Cottage. This was built on site in 1924. It was one of the later cottages originally built. And this was built by Nicholas Phelan. He was a builder from Chicago that was brought up here by the early Cottage Row families to do some building. And he and his brother eventually settled here on the island, and they have monuments down in the cemetery on the island where they were buried. So originally it was built for Margaret Riggs and eventually sold to the Manitou Island Association and Manitou Island Association's Margaret Londrigan, who was a secretary for William Angel, who was the executive director of the Manitou Island Association group. That group, you can see, we just peeked inside the window here and saw what that looks like in here. As we come around the back, you can see that there was an addition taken off the back here as well, and the foundation of these cottages were all recently redone. We're going to walk out back here to this little outbuilding, check that out. Recently the park also had a crew come in and remove vegetation around these buildings, which is given a lot more space. You may notice that it looks like some of that's been cut back recently. Here is an apple tree behind the house. And looking at the back of the house here, so you can see how this bottom lattice work is been newly repaired, and that was because they redid the foundations of these houses in order to stabilize them. These houses are all actively under renovation. It's been a slow process getting renovation work done on them, but they've been continuously protected by the park. This front step area is kind of crumbling with the brick steps. We're going to keep walking here. So let me tell you a little bit more about Cottage Row. So as I said, this was developed in the 1890s by a group of friends from Chicago that was the Blossoms, the Trudes, and the Foots. There was an 18-acre common area down in front, and there was a dock to Lake Michigan for them to use, a landing on Lake Manitou and the interior of the island, and this whole place was purchased for $500, and they sold subplots to their friends. There were 10 plots, and the plots were each 200 by 100 feet. These were meant for, again, summer use. This vacant lot we're coming along to here now is where the Keating Cottage was, and it was built in 1895. It was later moved to the other end of Cottage Row and ended up being torn down because it didn't have a good foundation down there. This cottage here is the Howard Foote Cottage. This was the original Howard Foote Cottage. He had built that second cottage down the way that became the kit home later. And most recently, what's been very charming is that one of the volunteers, Dave Hooper, who is a retired park ranger, had identified where there were roses growing, and he was able to protect them so they could regrow. And if those roses are original to Cottage Row, that would make them over 100 years old. So this cottage we're coming up to next, again, is the Howard Foote Cottage, built in 1894 by Nicholas Phelan. It is a dog trot style, meaning that it had one central breezeway with side rooms to catch the breeze. And this it's unique in this area because it's typically architectural style you see in the South. This also has this beautiful front porch with the bottom stonework, which was done with beach stones. The foundation was also redone recently on this, you can see. And as we walk around the back, you will see that there was an additional side of the building that was recently taken off. The park has been in the process of taking these structures back and restoring them to their original footprints. So that is why you see what looks like an interior door on the back of this right now, is because it's been recently changed and taken back to its original size. All of these buildings inside here, other than we saw the last one had a little bit of plaster in a room, these are all beautiful wood interiors, built again by Nicholas Phelan and his brother. As we look here on this beautiful porch, we'll take a step up here a little bit, but we're not going to go onto the porch area. These structures should not be entered on North Manitou. There's a lot of historic structures that are around the island in various states of repair or disrepair, and the park asks people not to enter them. And these ones are all locked as well. So now we're coming up to the Trude Cottage. It was built in 1894. The Trudes were one of the original friend group couples that developed to this area. This was also built by Nicholas Phelan, also dog trot style. Later, this was owned by Clark Fisk and his family, and it was used up until the late 70s as a family vacation spot for them every summer. They did sell their cottage directly to the park. Most of the cottages here were owned by the Manitou Island Association. So I've mentioned them before. That was a group that came along in the 1920s, led by William Angel, who was an automotive executive from Detroit. William Angel had come to the island and started amassing property with a syndicate of other executives from the Detroit area. And their idea was to make this into a resort for them to use for their executive friends and whatnot. And they introduced deer to the island that were used for hunting as well. So as we walk around and we see these outbuildings, you'll notice there's a cistern kind of collapsing there. A couple more outbuildings. Again, the park has recently taken vegetation back, which is really great because it increases the airflow around these buildings as well as protects them somewhat from fire, which was part of the original reason why they did it. It was a group of, for the National Park Service, a fire prevention group that was coming around and cutting vegetation away from historic structures. So there were additional buildings built out behind this one. This one is unique in that the cottages were, when originally to Cottage Row, they had one cottage. The cottages did not have their own kitchens. They had outhouses. They did not have plumbing. They did not have electricity. This house eventually did get plumbing, electricity. It's got a bathroom in it that was added on later through time. So you'll notice that this one does have more structures out back as well, which was different. And it's got this lovely long porch. And we're going to step up here on the porch and peek in the windows so that you can get a look at some of this beautiful wood interior. So we'll go right up to it, and there you go. You can see that a bit. Fireplace inside, hallway off the back, and this again was Nicholas Phelan. Instead of finishing out the rooms, they just basically took the wood walls and finished them, and it just was, all these cottages are just absolutely beautiful on the inside. And we'll turn around here and take a look out at the Manitou Passage, which is the waterway between the island and the mainland. So all these cottages had this beautiful view, and they sit up on this berm, this low berm area, and look out over onto Lake Michigan, which is just gorgeous. Now we're coming up on the Blossom Cottage. This was Carrie and George's house. It was moved to this site in 1894 from the farm area, and it is currently in ruins. It was also known as the Burdick Tanglewood House for a while later with a family that owned it. And all that you can see left here is a chimney and a great deal of wood debris on the ground. This house was in ruins when the Park Service took the island over. The Park Service took the island over in 1983-84 for the 84 season, and it was already in ruins at that time. And you can see there's berries growing in here. But it was, at one time, a 1.5-story beautiful home that had a very large porch. And across the way from that is some more roses that were identified. And once they were able to identify them and put these pin flags in and build these little trellises there, it's protected them from getting weed whacked or mowed over along this area. And you can see how pretty they are. And that's just one of the most charming things to me is these roses coming back. So this next space on the right, there's nothing here among these trees. It used to be the Hewitt Cottage. It was built in 1895 or 96, and it was removed in the 1940s because it was collapsing. There was an English couple called the Hewitts who built it, and it had a beautiful interior. It was later sold to the Rhodes family, who built this little building on the left here. On the left as we walk. It's still on our right, but it was a tree house built for their daughter Margaret. Now Margaret, when she got married, later when she got older, her parents had the bottom part built in, so it became a 2-story cabin. So it's this really unique architecture, and you can see where the 2 trees used to be beside it that are now just stumps. And we'll come a little closer. The next large house we're going to get to is the Katie Shepherd. But as we look at this house, it's kind of built with, whatever odds and ends were around, which is pretty typical for the island. They had access to a lot of lumber here, but they also were islanders and had to make do with what they had as well. You can see inside the interior, interestingly, look at that. Those logs have got bark on them, which I think is a really interesting choice for near a fireplace. Seems pretty flammable, but that it's beautiful. Again, vegetation cut back down here. You can see, you can walk around here really nicely now. It used to be a little thicker back here, and we'll step back so you can get a view of the back side of this cute little cottage. And the fireplace is partially collapsed, and the bricks are here on the ground still. A lot of what's here, this debris, is really protected artifacts. So people are asked to not move, disturb, or remove anything that they find here. So the last house we're going to look at, and this is lot number 1, this is the first lot on Cottage Row, is the Katie Shepherd Hotel. It was first built in 1895 or 96 by William and Eleanor Shepherd and their daughter Katie. They were from Chicago, and later Katie opened it up as the Beaches Hotel in 1908, and it offered dining facilities out back. Nicholas Phelan was involved in remodeling it, and it has this really nice little sidewalk there. And again, we've got another one of the roses, or 2 roses here that were identified and marked that are coming back. And there's the other one. You'll notice the beautiful beach stone foundation of this porch. And as we walk here, the shutters are still on it. The house did get a new roof this summer, which is super exciting. Again, the park is taking care of all these buildings right now, doing foundations, doing roofs, and doing some interiors as they go along. This building has been restored by Preserve Historic Sleeping Bear, and we'll peek in here a little bit as well, and you can see it has this beautiful wood interior also, and it is just absolutely gorgeous house. It has 9 rooms inside it. And you can see there's another video on my YouTube channel here which has a walkthrough of this building. You can see the inside of it. And the porch chairs are inside this summer because of all the work going on with the roofing. And there you can see out onto the Manitou Passage. This was open in the past. There weren't all these trees. Of course, there is one older tree there, but the vegetation, there was no vegetation out in front of these originally when they were built. And it has, this is interesting, this house has 4 doorways here onto the porch. And again, it was originally built as a single-family summer home, but eventually Katie did have it changed over to this hotel. Out here in back, you can see where the dining structure used to be. There was a couple of little buildings out here. One was a dining structure, and there was another building over top of the root cellar over there you can see, and there's a cistern back there. Let's get a look back here what this looks like. One of the dormers had some work done when they redid the roof. You can see that. And this is just such a beautiful home. It was very close to being in absolute ruins when Preserve Historic Sleeping Bear started working on it in 2009. You can see a video on my YouTube channel about that project as well. So other related videos, there is a video walkthrough of this building and also of the Trude Cottage that you can find on my YouTube channel if you want to see the insides of some of these cottages. Here is the root cellar that used to have a building over top of it at one point, and the dining hall that used to sit back here. So Katie, in 1908, Katie started serving meals here because the lodge dining hall on the other far end got closed down because at that point Silas Boardman had sold his interest to the Newhalls, and the Newhalls were also doing farming there, and eventually they decided they needed that lodge area for their employees and were not going to serve the Cottage Row guests anymore. And at that point, Katie took up the slack and she opened her own dining hall back here and fed everyone. You can see here in the cement, Nicholas Phelan's N. Phelan, 1919 has his name there in the cement. So he was a part of that remodel. Of course, there's a bunch of sawdust that's on the ground there. So this was quite the hub of social activity here at the Katie Shepherd because everybody came and gathered here for their meals. They gathered on this porch, and she was a very friendly, social person, very community-minded. These shutters are covering some extremely beautiful windows, so I do hope that you will look at my other video touring this. There's a lot of detail work in the windows that is absolutely beautiful. But they do cover these windows in the wintertime just so that they don't get damaged by any blowing, falling limbs or anything like that, because they are original glass. So we'll walk back out here toward the berm, so you can see how kind of steep this hillside is right here. As we walk toward the end of the sidewalk, this is where the sidewalk ends, and it is also the edge of the designation for the federally protected wilderness. So there's a sign here, entering wilderness, and as we walk here to the edge, we get to the edge of the sidewalk, and the trail goes on down into the island wilderness. There's an apple tree. There's another old tree. That tree's obviously been here quite a while and was original. But normally, or back in the day, that whole area below there would have been wide open. As we look down here, these cottages had wells, pumps down in the hillside. You can see it down there. These steps go down, and you can see there's a ton of poison ivy here as well. But down these steps, that was a well. It had like a gazebo structure built over it, this decorative gazebo structure. So again, there is the Katie Shepherd Hotel with its beautiful porch, and it would have been a very lovely place to come and visit and to enjoy and sit on the porch. And this particular walk here is just one of my favorite places to walk on the whole island, just down Cottage Row, because it is just such a lovely, lovely walk with all these nice mature trees. And this is a place that campers walk past all the time and don't often know the history. The island is 9 by 4 miles and about 15,000 acres. And most of the area of the island is federally protected wilderness, with the exception of this village area. The village area includes a sawmill area, a large barn, some other agricultural buildings, and also life-saving station buildings and ranger station buildings here as well. So this was part of a village. And again, this was developed back in the late 1800s, and the golden age of this summer area was late 1800s, early 1900s, and eventually the families were friends. They all came from the same area in Chicago, which is now Hyde Park. They knew each other in Chicago. They would come up every summer and stay together here on the island, and it was a very easy, relatively easy for the time, commute up on steamer ships on Lake Michigan. They would catch a ship in Chicago and come up and be here within the space of a day. They would be here on North Manitou, so it was relatively easy for Chicago residents to be able to come up here to the island. Eventually, over time, the families started to intermarry. They also had relationships with the farming families on the island. On the rest of the island, out in what is now wilderness, there are farmsteads throughout. And some of the farm kids would come here and work in the summers in the houses to help, staff the houses. They would also work at Katie Shepherd's restaurant, a dining hall. Looking out here on the Manitou Passage, it's just so beautiful. Looking toward the mainland, it's a little hazy. You can't quite see the mainland right now. Normally you can see it very clearly. So it was easy to see across, and it's about 10-11 miles over to the mainland from here. But the families would also, the summer families also would buy produce, and so they would employ the farm families, but they would also buy farm products from them as well, meat and produce. So they were a big part of the island economy in the summertime. And here we're looking over onto, well, you can see out in the water, you can see the dock, that's where the boat arrives. And those other buildings are part of the life-saving station. The tallest building is the ranger station, which is currently in use. Here you can see that large space. This was the large 18-acre park-like space in front that was shared common space for the Cottage Row residents. So as we walk along here, you can see those buildings again. There are several buildings down there that are part of the life-saving station, ranger station complex. The one on the far left is a house, and then the one in the middle there is a boathouse, which was used to launch rescue boats. And we'll walk along here a bit more. You can see this little structure peeking up on the hillside there. That's a little mechanical room that's built into the hillside. And we're going to take the stairs. There's a staircase built into the side of the hill up here. We're going to take the stairs down, and in my next video, we will take a look at the buildings there in the ranger station area, and we'll walk around the outside of those. But we'll come down these beautiful little stairs. Thank you very much for joining me on this tour of Cottage Row. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about island history. Thank you again. And again, this is Stacy from 2 Weeks in a Hammock. You have a wonderful day.